Welcome back to Cultish, everybody. It is me, the Super Sleuth, here, along with
Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here.
All right, guys, it's time to have a serious conversation here. Here at Cultish, we are a 100% crowd-funded ministry, and with that can come some challenges. We're currently at like 15 to 20%. We're meeting about that much of our needs in order to continue releasing episodes on a weekly basis for you guys. I mean, we want to be able to equip everybody with the tools necessary to enter into the kingdom of the cult with the power of the gospel, but we can't do that without your support, right? We need to keep the lights on in the studio where we do the recording. We need to be able to pay for the people who edit these episodes to release them to you. We also have plans on our website to make these resources and extra content available for you without a paywall. But in order to do that, we do need your support. So please prayerfully consider partnering with us, right? As we look to counter the cults, to enter into the kingdom of the cult with the power of the gospel. And again, we can't do that without your support. And we are so thankful for you listening today.
And so go to thecultishshow.com. You can see right there where we can partner with us. And Andrew and I look forward to releasing more content and countering more cults, being right side alongside all of you very, very soon.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to our Under the Banner of Heaven series. If you are watching this, again, thank you so much for your support. That means you pay to get this content. So I hope you like this content. We have worked really hard to get this to you, and we are actually extremely excited about it as well, because now we're going to dive deep into things. We're going to be looking at the ins and outs, and not just covering things on a broad overview anymore, right? We want you to see the research that we put into almost every episode that we've ever done on Cultish, but more specifically into topics that we can address and get really into. Very excited about it. Again, I have Ryan with me, the historian. I think that's your new nickname now.
That's fine.
The historian.
The historian.
Yes.
I am going to make that my name on eHarmony.
On eHarmony?
Yeah, that's right.
Not even Christian Mingle?
No. I don't go into that kind of heresies.
Okay.
I don't know, whatever.
But you go into the
I don't know what kind of weird stuff those people are into. eHarmony, the old school.
That is so funny. Okay. But so the last episode, go talk about what we talked about and bring us into what we're going to be going through today. Kind of give us a summary too of the first, just a real quick summary of the first into the second and to where we're at now.
Right. So what we've covered already is we have talked about the environment in which Joseph Smith Jr. and his family grew up, and the influences that were present in their lives, especially having to do with the Second Great Awakening and the magic kind of stuff. There were a lot of different magical practices, but also we talked about last time about money digging. Which is a practice where you basically tell somebody that you have the magical ability to spot buried treasure on their land, and they pay you to go look until you can find a way to get yourself out of this. We also talked a bit about the first vision, a lot about the first vision, which is central to Mormon history and Mormon theology. And that was a vision where Joseph Smith supposedly saw God, and God told him to not join any churches because everybody, all the doctrines in those churches were corrupt, and so were the people who were professing all these things. And we talked a bit about how that was a major impediment to the spread of Mormonism and how that led to a lot of persecution, especially in the early days.
That's what we were told.
Yeah, supposedly. Yeah, and now we're all the way up to about 1827-ish and the beginning of the composition of the Book of Mormon. So now we're getting to some things that will hopefully be a little bit more familiar.
Wow. Okay, so when we get into the composition of the Book of Mormon, where do we even begin?
Yeah, that's kind of tricky because I think the question has to be raised. If the story isn't really true, then where does it come from? Where is it that he gets this idea of a book that will cover all this history of Native Americans and all that kind of stuff. I think that was actually fairly well trodden ground before Joseph Smith ever got to it. The difference between the books that were already written, like View of the Hebrews or Solomon Spaulding, his manuscript, the difference between those things and the Book of Mormon is that Joseph Smith claimed that the Book of Mormon was scripture and that he himself was a prophet. That was the main difference. Also, View of the Hebrews, frankly, is just a better book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm going to put that out there.
So we're talking about the Solomon Spaulding manuscript.
Yeah. Solomon Spaulding, I won't go into this too much because it's a theory that's pretty much been debunked by now. But Solomon Spaulding was a man who in the 1810s, I think it was 1817, that he wrote a manuscript of a novel that would tell this epic story of Native Americans. The impression that I got of it was that it was sort of like a West Side Story type of thing,
So like a Romeo and Juliet with Native Americans?
Yeah, a little bit like that. It's hard to say because it's hard to find an actual copy of this because it was never actually published. It was just a manuscript. But there are very tenuous connections between that and certain people involved in early Mormonism. But I think the evidence points away from that as being an explanation for how we got the Book of Mormon, partly because, frankly, we don't really need it.
Okay, gotcha. Because what I've heard with it is supposedly the book manuscripts were stolen and then plagiarized by Joseph Smith, and that book never got published, and things of that nature. It's
just it's a lot harder to believe that than that he was making up a lot of stuff and had plenty of time to think about it.
Gotcha. So where do you want to start with the Book of Mormon? Do you want to talk about like the actual organization's teachings on the Book of Mormon, how he even was able to get it, the lizard and stuff like that?
The lizard and all that. So the basic story kind of works like this, and this is I'll just say as an overview that on the night of September 21st to the 22nd in 1823, Joseph Smith supposedly received 3 visitations from an angel. And the way that this plays out is kind of odd because they're almost identical. In the first vision that he receives, the angel tells him that the Book of Mormon exists and that it can be found, and that in the possession of or in the vicinity of the Book of Mormon is also something called the Urim and the Thummim. These are these rocks that are supposedly like they're sort of like the rock that Willard Chase was talking about in the previous episode.
Like a scry.
Yeah, like you can look through these and they will reveal all sorts of mystical kind of things. And so you find, the angel tells him you can find the Book of Mormon and the Urim and Thummim, but he is warned by the angel to keep it on the down low and not tell a whole lot of people. So that's the first vision. And then the angel goes away. And the angel comes back and he says the exact same thing again. The impression that I get is that it's verbatim. Like he says exactly the same thing. But then he adds some apocalyptic stuff saying that the world is basically going to end sometime soon.
Latter-day Saints. We got to remember that. It's in the name.
Yeah, if you were wondering what Latter-day meant, it's Latter-day.
Yeah, so apocalyptic.
Right. And like we mentioned in passing in previous episodes, almost every Christian cult is apocalyptic. They all say this is the end times, this is the final days. And I think that there's something really engaging about that. Like there's something about, especially the Book of Revelation, that just draws people in and keeps people fascinated. I think it's like you're looking at this code, basically. And it's so scintillating, like I could be the one to break this code, or this could mean all sorts of different fantastical things. And it really draws the imagination in.
Yeah.
And that's the story of how I got my copy of the Tim LaHaye Prophecy Bible.
When people in deeper study then realize that almost 75 to 80% of it is Old Testament allusions in Old Testament language that you need to be familiar with in order to understand the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, there's so much. one thing that I tell people when they become Christians or when they're kind of baby Christians, I say, whatever you do in your Bible reading program or whatever, do not start with Revelation.
That is so funny.
Go with the Gospel of John, do Romans, Genesis, classic. Do not start with Revelation. If you're looking for Bible teachers, R.C. Sproul, James White, somebody like that. Not Hal Lindsey. Leave that kind of stuff for later, because there is this kind of foundation that you have to have in order to even approach those kinds of issues. Like, we love our dispensationalist brothers, but really you have to have a foundation on your ecclesiology, your doctrine of the church, before you can address issues like, does God have like a second chosen people in the Jews? Don't start with Revelation.
I like how you say that, actually, because if we think about Mormonism, it's kind of like starting with the apocalyptic and going backwards. Like, there's a very reason why they believe that the saints can go down into spirit prison and preach the gospel, is because they believe they're in the very last dispensation of the age. So typically it's their eschatology that will fuel the way that they look upon the entire Bible or Word of God in general.
Yeah, really. And that's something that, to be fair, is not at all unique to Mormons. I mean, I met so many people who they're so certain that the references to locusts in Revelation are about Apache helicopters.
That's what I was taught growing up at Calvary Chapel.
I was looking for those for a time. We were talking earlier about like in between filming about our high school and middle school experiences. I went through a Tim LaHaye / Left Behind / Jack Van Impe phase, if you know what that is. He used to have this this Saturday night program where his wife would read all of these like news stories, and then he would say, okay, well, this is Gog and Magog and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And like, I went through a phase. I was super popular as a middle schooler, by the way. I don't know if you know this. But that was me for a time. And in retrospect, I'm like, there were so many people who will start with the presupposition that such and such model of the end times is true and have no idea what the Trinity is. Have no clue what the hypostatic union is, what any of that kind of stuff is. Like, let the fundamentals be the fundamentals. Let them be your foundation, and then it's going to light the way for everything else. And if you don't do that, this is one of the things that can happen.
Wow.
In any case, that's only 2 out of the 3 visions.
Wait. So let me ask you a question too. What's the time frame between these 3 visions? Do you know?
It's all in one night.
Oh, it's all in one night.
It's all
so you had 3 bad dreams. So these are sleeping dreams.
We can just read it from his account here. He
go for it.
And this is found in the beginning of any copy of the Book of Mormon that you're likely to find. He says, on the evening of the 21st of September, 1823, I betook myself to prayer and supplication to Almighty God. While I was thus in the act of calling upon God, I discovered a light appearing in my room, which continued to increase until the room was lighter than at noonday, when immediately a personage appeared at my bedside, standing in the air, for his feet did not touch the floor. He had on a loose robe of most exquisite whiteness. It was a whiteness beyond anything earthly I had ever seen. Nor do I believe that any earthly thing could be made to appear so exceedingly white and brilliant. His hands were naked, his arms also, a little above the wrists. So also were his feet naked, as were his legs, a little above the ankles. His head and neck were also bare. I could discover that he had no other clothing on but his robe, as it was open, so that I could see into his bosom. That is the weirdest way that he could have described that, by the way.
So it's like such a white, clear robe that he could see the genitals of this angel?
It said bosom. I don't know if that's genitals.
The chest.
Yeah, that's the... think of the Ghost of Christmas Present from...
right.
Yeah. It's still, I mean...
Interesting. Anyways.
It's a minor point, but it's weird.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then he goes on to say, not only was his robe exceedingly white, but his whole person was glorious beyond description, and his countenance truly like lightning. The room was exceedingly light, but not so very bright as immediately around his person. When I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. He called me by my name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Moroni, that God had a work for me to do, and that my name should be had for good and evil among all nations, kindreds, and tongues, or that it should be both good and evil spoken of among all people. He said there was a book deposited, written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent, and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, as delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. Also that there were 2 stones in silver bows, and these stones fastened to a breastplate constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim, deposited with the plates, and the possession and use of these stones were what constituted seers in ancient or former times, and that God had prepared them for the purpose of translating the book. Again, he told me when I got those plates of which he had spoken, for the time that they should be obtained was not yet fulfilled, I should not show them to any person, neither the breastplate with the Urim and Thummim, only to those to whom I should be commanded to show them. If I did, I should be destroyed. While he was conversing with me about the plates, the vision was opened to my mind that I could see the place where the plates were deposited, and that so clearly and distinctly that I knew the place again when I visited it. After this communication, I saw light in the room began to gather immediately around the person of him who had been speaking to me, and it continued to do so until the room was again left dark, except just around him, when instantly I saw, as it were, a conduit open right up into heaven, and he ascended until he entirely disappeared, and the room was left as it had been before this heavenly light had made its appearance. That's your first vision of the night. I lay musing on the singularity of the scene and marveling greatly at what had been told to me by this extraordinary messenger, when in the midst of my meditation I suddenly discovered that my room was again beginning to get lighted, and in an instant, as it were, the same heavenly messenger was again by my bedside. He commenced and again related the very same things which he had done at his first visit, without the least variation, which having done, he informed me of great judgments which were coming upon the earth with great desolations by famine, sword, and pestilence, and that these grievous judgments would come on the earth in this generation. Having related these things, he again ascended as he had done before. Just as a side note, that did not happen.
Yeah, in this generation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of an oversight, right? Like, this is in every Book of Mormon that I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
In any case, that's your second vision. In the third one, he says this, by this time so deep were the impressions made on my mind that sleep had fled from my eyes, and I lay overwhelmed in astonishment at what I had both seen and heard. But what was my surprise when again I beheld the same messenger at my bedside, and heard him rehearse or repeat over again to me the same things as before, and added a caution to me, telling me that Satan would try to tempt me in consequence of the indigent circumstances of my father's family to get the plates for the purpose of getting rich. This he forbade me, saying that I must have no other object in view in getting the plates, but to glorify God, and must not be influenced by any other motive than that of building his kingdom. Otherwise, I would not get them. After this third visit, he again ascended into heaven as before, and I was left to ponder on the strangeness of what I had just experienced. So, if you've been listening to this podcast for all the previous episodes and today, you may have noticed that Joseph Smith is a little verbose.
Yeah.
He says a lot of things. Like, he can't write at all, but he can put one word in front of another really, really well, to the extent that, gosh, that actually like strained my voice a little bit just to read that. And that can actually be an impediment to people learning or reading the Book of Mormon or Doctrine and Covenants in the first place. It's just really hard. Like, there's so many random words in there. But in any case, so that's the 3 visions that he has on the night of September 21st to 22nd, 1823. The first, just to reiterate, talks about the existence and location of the Book of Mormon and the Urim and Thummim. There we go. I got it. As well as warnings to not tell anybody about it, unless he was specifically commanded to do so. The second vision repeats the first one and then adds apocalyptic stuff. Third vision repeats the first 2 and then warns him against greed. So that's how we find out that the Book of Mormon actually exists. There's actually a 4th vision, but it's just he had a vision telling him to tell his father about this, and it's super uninteresting. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So he's got a heavenly visitation where it goes and comes back. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you this. Oh yeah, and I forgot to tell you this as well. It's so funny.
I've heard people say that there's some kind of significance to that kind of repetition, but I don't know a whole lot about that. But already, this just seems very different from what you find in the Bible, especially with angelic visitations and such. It's just, I can't really put my finger on it, but it just seems really different. From, like, say, what happens in the book of Daniel when he sees visitations and all that. It's very different from Ezekiel, of course, but, every story about angels is different from what Ezekiel says, with the wheels within wheels and the eyes everywhere, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Wow. So this is when he's supposedly told about this book or these plates. So what happens from there? Does he go looking for it?
He does. There's a period of about 4 years between when he initially finds out about the Book of Mormon and when he is actually allowed to take it home.
Okay.
Supposedly, he visited annually just to see if he was worthy to take it home. And then the angel just kept on refusing to let him go home with the plates.
So he wasn't like morally clean.
Yeah, he just wasn't pure enough. That was frankly the excuse that he gave. It's a weird kind of situation. Like, how pure do you have to be?
Yeah, how do you get pure?
Yeah. How did he actually do it? I mean, was it just normal spiritual growth, or there's no record, to the best of my knowledge, of any specific thing that he was doing to become pure.
That's kind of like the first sign of works-based system, right? Like, because to Christians, our purity and our righteousness comes from Christ, apart from anything that we have ever done, apart from any work of the law, right? But now we have Joseph saying he can't get this revelation from God unless he himself is pure, notating the fact that if he were to be a believer in Jesus Christ, the righteousness of Christ is actually not enough for him to grab these books.
And it sounds at first blush like a kind of humility. He's saying that I'm not pure enough. But then in 1827, when he is finally permitted to take the plates home, the implication is now he is worthy. And that's something that you have with any works-based system like that. Yes, you might think, oh, well, until I've done this, and this, I'm not really worthy. I'm not pure enough. But then if I have done it, though, then I must be pure enough. And that's kind of the flip side of it. And that's how you end up with, on the one hand, people in these systems who are either self-righteous and are dismissive of their sins, or people who are completely crushed and see that they have no hope in this system for growing or for achieving what it is that they hope to get.
So bring us into where were the plates? You said that there's an angel guarding the plates. What form was this angel in? Take us there.
The angel kind of took on different forms depending on which account you want to go with. There was at least one account of Joseph Smith seeing an angel in the form of a white salamander. This is not something that the church officially teaches anymore, but that account is out there. And in fact, it actually played into another fairly famous Mormon-related crime story of the story of Mark Hoffman, who was a Unabomber wannabe kind of thing in the mid 1980s. He was a master forger who was very, very good at what he did, and he forged a letter in which he basically just plagiarized that same account of the white salamander. But in any case, there were a lot of different stories about, like, he would show up on one day and be allowed to, like, pick up the plates, but he had to put them back down.
Right.
And that kind of stuff. And this was, the plates were supposedly found on the hill Cumorah, which was a hill near the Palmyra area. And I think Krakauer talks about this in his book, and he says, because there's a pageant that happens every year on the hill Cumorah to sort of commemorate this. He says that he went there at one point, and really, if there was not a pageant there, and if you didn't know anything about Mormonism or what this hill was, it would be completely insignificant. It's not even like a big hill or anything like that. It doesn't stand out at all, unless you're a Mormon or you know the significance of what supposedly happened there. But yeah, he didn't actually get permission to take the plates home until 1827. I'm not sure what the logic was behind that wait. Obviously, we don't believe that he received an angelic vision that told him that there were plates there. But unlike the first vision, he was actually telling people about this.
Right. Because it was in newspapers.
Yeah, it was something that people knew about. And again, he wasn't like standing on the rooftop and just blasting this, hear ye kind of thing. But people did know that he was claiming that he had some kind of special record somewhere. And they testified to that later on. And it was tricky. Like, why make this claim and then wait for 4 years? I personally think that he was trying to figure out how to make this all work for him.
Right.
He had this idea that he would have this record, but like, what do you do with that? What's the story that you want to tell? What's the path that you want to take? And he really could have just written a book. There was nothing to stop him from doing this. I think if all that he wanted was just money, he could have even written the Book of Mormon as we have it now, word for word, and just said, this isn't scripture. This is just like a
fiction.
Yeah, like a Pilgrim's Progress kind of thing. Like, this is just a depiction of what I personally believe, but I'm not a prophet. So that's one of the reasons for why I think there was more to it than just financial gain. He could have done the same exact thing and not started a church.
So what angel was it? What's the name of the angel that was protecting the Book of Mormon?
That was Moroni.
And what's the theology behind that? Because wasn't Moroni essentially someone who was once human as well?
Yeah, he is one of the characters in the Book of Mormon. And actually the fact that he's an angel is a problem. And I don't really know how Mormons deal with this, but in Mormon theology, without going too far into this right now, I think we should probably address like basic Mormon theology in a future episode. We'll see. Without going too far into it, once you die, you enter into the next stage of your progression towards godhood. So in Mormonism, damnation is what happens when you are prevented from going any further. Angels supposedly are people who have been damned, actually. They cannot go any further. They have to remain in this sort of divine state, but they can't progress towards godhood, and they can't be united with their families together forever.
They're servants, essentially.
Yeah. So like your average Mormon isn't going to refer to angels as being damned, but that is, theologically, that is what that is. And so that's why Jesus says what he does in Mark 13 about people being like angels because they're not getting married or anything like that. And so that's what Moroni is. He was somebody who was very prevalent and very important in the story of the Book of Mormon, but he does appear as an angel and he's never described as being a god, which is a problem, in my opinion.
Right. It just defeats the whole purpose of eternal progression, really. If Moroni was this important, specific character with a revelation in the Book of Mormon, how come he just only ends up as an angel facing damnation instead of being deity? Some
might try and say that Moroni wasn't actually damned, that he was just in that state. But even still, if memory serves, he shows up at the end of the Book of Mormon, and he is there in the mid 5th century AD. So for a period of 14 centuries, give or take, he's presumably working towards godhood, and he's still just an angel. And this is somebody who is very highly revered by Mormons. So I would have to imagine that from the perspective of your average Mormon, they would have to say, I know I'm not anywhere near as good as Moroni was. I am like much more of a sinner than how he's presented. And honestly, in the Book of Mormon, it's very melodramatic. There are people there are really, 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 really good guys, and there are really, 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 really bad guys. And Moroni is one of the really good guys. So from their perspective, I couldn't imagine looking on a character like this and saying, I know I'm not anywhere near as righteous as this Moroni guy is. And still, it takes him 14 centuries to not get to his ultimate destination. Like, how long is it going to take me? What am I going to do with that? You know, I think that's one of the many things in Mormonism, that if a Mormon is being consistent in their theology, it's got to give them some kind of neuroses. Like, you would just be anxious all the time. How would you even know if you had done well enough? Like, what's the standard? How do you get to the point where you feel any sense of security?
That's crazy. Yeah. I've never really thought about that. So with these plates, isn't there a story too where he runs with them?
Yes, this is a fun story. So the way that it goes is that he's running. He goes to the Hill Cumorah where the plates are, and he picks them up and he puts them in basically the equivalent of a pillowcase. You know, it's a fabric kind of thing, and then people find out that he's going to do this, and they go and try and stop him. And they start chasing him through the forest until he finally finds his way home. He actually goes so far as to say that at one point he sort of leapt over a fallen tree, you know. Here's the problem. Joseph Smith at one point actually gave the dimensions for the plates. You know, he says it's this many inches tall, this many inches wide, this many inches deep. We have metallurgists who can determine, depending on what the materials are supposed to be in these plates, how much exactly this was supposed to weigh. And the estimates are anywhere from 200 to 500 pounds.
6 inches wide and 8 inches long. That's what the records state.
Yeah, and they're saying, like, depending on what it's made of, it's anywhere from 200 to 500 pounds. Now, I'm not a little guy, and I've done a lot of warehouse work where I've had to downstack pallets and things like that. I could not run with 200 pounds of anything, not counting, you know, me. But, you know, if I had to carry Andrew through a forest and run away from pursuers, they're going to catch me, and I'm going to throw Andrew at them first just to see if that works.
You couldn't Forrest Gump me.
No, absolutely not. I'm not gonna do my Lieutenant Dan thing, and that's not gonna work. And actually, the guys at Mormonism Research Ministry made a replica, and they take it with them when they go to like the Manti pageant and things like that, and they use it as a way to spark conversations. You know, they ask Mormons like, "Hey, see if you can lift this," and then they inevitably can't. And then that leads to, you know, did you know that this is a story that Joseph Smith told and all that kind of stuff. And it's a great conversation starter. But yeah, that is one of the claims that Joseph Smith made, that he was running through the forest. And I think it's also worth mentioning that in this case, you would have to wonder what the motive would be for the persecutors. Like, what are they trying to do? I mean,
yeah, it's an extravagant claim. So was that when he gives that story, is that when he was first worthy to grab the plates and someone saw him and he was dipping with them?
Yeah, he was coming home with the plates.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then he gets the plates. What now?
Yeah. So for a little bit, not all that much happens. He supposedly keeps the place in a chest that was made by Willard Chase, who we mentioned in the last episode. But nobody can see the plates. Nobody's allowed to look at the plates, otherwise they will be destroyed. And so for a little bit, it seems like he's kind of figuring out what he's going to do next. But then after a while, he gets to the point where he's ready to begin the translation process. The first time, and the reason for why this is difficult is because, frankly, even though Joseph Smith had a third-grade education, he could read and write. He wasn't very good at it. We mentioned in the last episode a particularly important journal entry that he made that was the first account of the first vision. Even if you didn't know that that's what it was, you could tell the difference between you could tell that Joseph Smith had written that and not one of his scribes or secretaries. Most of the time, his journal entries were written by somebody else, and he would dictate to him. This one, though, you could tell that it was him because it was just riddled with spelling mistakes. There was no punctuation really at all. That's the kind of authorship that he brings to the table. And that's not a knock at people who have any difficulty reading or writing. You know, it is what it is. But all that is to say that in order to produce the Book of Mormon, he needs people who can do the writing for him.
An editor.
Yes. And the first editor that he had was actually his wife, Emma. We'll talk a little bit about who she was. She's really, really super important. Her story is absolutely heart-wrenching. We'll talk a little bit more about her later, but she was the first secretary, for lack of a better term. But that was always meant to be temporary because she had so many other responsibilities. You know, she has other stuff that she needs to do. And so after a little bit, Smith runs into a guy named Martin Harris. Martin Harris is absolutely fascinating. I didn't realize just how interesting he was until I started doing this. But yeah, he was born on the 18th of May, 1783. He actually served in the War of 1812 in the New York militia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he was one of the few people in Mormonism at the time that did have a military background. He was also a fairly wealthy person. He owned about 320 acres out Palmyra. But he was also known to be sort of eccentric when it came to religion. He was constantly moving from one religious group to another religious group. That included people like Quakers, Universalists, Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterian, obviously Mormon. But even then, he moves on to Mormon splinter groups later on. Like he can't stay in one place. I don't really know what his motivation was really, but he just constantly caught up in new religious stuff that was going on. So he had a tendency, and he was known for this at the time. He had a tendency to be really credulous. He would believe a lot of random stuff and would actually make a lot of really weird claims. There's a book called Gleanings by the Way, which was written by, it was a reverend that was there at the time. And my goodness, this did not go to the right place. But he wrote this in reference to Martin Harris. He said, no matter where he went, he saw visions and supernatural appearances all around him. He told a gentleman in Palmyra after one of his excursions to Pennsylvania while translating the Book of Mormon that on the way he met the Lord Jesus Christ, who walked along by the side of him in the shape of a deer for 2 or 3 miles, talking with him as familiarly as one man talks to another. That's one weird thing that he said. He also said he once saw the devil, and the devil looked like a donkey.
So Jesus was a deer, the devil was a donkey.
Oh, yeah. I mean, didn't everyone know that?
Interesting.
I don't know. There was another one here. He says, Martin Harris, after he went to Kirtland, Ohio, where, as we have seen, the first Mormon settlement was formed, used occasionally to return to Palmyra. As one of the 3 witnesses, he claimed divine inspiration and is, I believe, to the present day regarded by the Mormons as one of the greatest and best among the Latter-day Saints. In these visits to the place of his former residence, he not only endeavored to proselyte his old acquaintances to his new faith, but used sometimes to edify them with very solemn prophecies of future events. I was informed by Judge S. of Palmyra that he came to his office so much and uttered his prophecies so frequently that he at length told him that he would not consent to his uttering his predictions any more orally. I'm going to say orally again because that was horrible. His predictions any more orally, but that he must write them down and describe his name to them, or else seek some other place for the exercise of the prophetic gift. Harris instantly wrote down 2 predictions, attaching his signature to each. The one was a declaration that Palmyra will be destroyed and left utterly without inhabitants before the year 1836. The other prediction was that before 1838, the Mormon faith would so extensively prevail that it would modify our national government, and there would at that period be no longer any occupant of the presidential chair of the United States. To these predictions, he subjoined the declaration that if they were not literally fulfilled, anyone might have full permission to cut off his head and roll it around the streets as a football. That's
Wow.
Martin Harris for you.
Yeah, he was a very interesting guy.
Fascinating.
So he's one of the three witnesses. Who are the three witnesses?
Yes. Well, the three witnesses, there's at the beginning of every Book of Mormon, there are a couple of different testimonies. One is the testimony of the three witnesses, and one is the testimony of 8 witnesses. These are 2 testimonies that pertain to the Book of Mormon itself, especially the plates. In the testimony of 8 witnesses, it says, "Be it known unto all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people, unto whom this work shall come, that Joseph Smith, Jr., the translator of this work, has shown to us the plates of which hath been spoken, which have the appearance of gold, and as many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands. And we also saw the engravings thereon, all of which has the appearance of ancient work and of curious workmanship." And then the other one, it says, "Be it known unto all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people, unto whom this work shall come, that we, through the grace of God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ, have seen the plates which contain this record." So both of these accounts, they show the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses claiming that they actually physically saw the plates.
Total of 11 different people.
Yes. The 3 witnesses are Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. The testimony of the 8 witnesses are ascribed to Christian Whitmer, Jacob, Peter, and John Whitmer, Hiram Page, Joseph Smith Sr., Hiram Smith, and Samuel H. Smith. With the exception of the members of the Smith family, every other person on that list at one point or another either left the church or were excommunicated.
With the testimony of the 8 witnesses?
And the 3 witnesses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the only ones that actually stayed were Joseph Smith Sr., Hiram Smith, and Samuel H. Smith. Many of these people actually came back. Martin Harris left the church twice and came back twice. Oliver Cowdery also similarly left the church. He was actually really kicked out. He got kicked out by the Danites. That's pretty hard. And eventually was allowed to come back in. I believe that was after Joseph Smith's death and the movement to Utah. But yeah, everybody else, they left at some point, and most of them came back or joined some kind of Mormon splinter group at some point.
Wow. So the 2 scribes essentially that we have was Emma
So far,
and Martin Harris.
Yeah, and Martin Harris is particularly important because he was wealthy.
Right.
What he could do was to subsidize the process of getting this translation done. People don't really realize this, but if you're spending all your time doing the translating, you can't go and get another job. So somebody's got to pay for Joseph Smith and his family to survive. And that was Martin Harris.
So he's essentially, since we're going to say there's no such thing as the Book of Mormon, there was no golden plates, he was essentially a publisher paying Joseph Smith to write a book that hasn't been written yet until the book was written. This
was actually kind of a problem because the progress under Martin Harris really was very slow. It was problematic because he had to form the sentences perfectly the first time. He didn't have the option of going through and editing anything. He can't be like, oh, we got to go back because, that was wrong. He was claiming that he was translating by the gift and power of God. And the translation process looked like this. He would have the person that was taking the dictation would be over in one part of the room, at a table or something. Then there would be a towel or a blanket draped across the center of that room, and Joseph Smith would be on the other side out of view. And supposedly, he would put the plates in his hat, I'm assuming it's like a fairly tall hat, right? And he would pull the hat closed over his eyes while looking through the spectacles of the Urim and the Thummim. And what he would see is he would see this kind of like holographic projection of the word in Reformed Egyptian, which is the language that he said that the Book of Mormon was written in. It would appear in this kind of holographic way. And then the correct English word or phrase would also appear in that way. Then he would say the correct English word out loud. The other person would write it. And if there were any mistakes that were made in writing down that word, then the word would remain in the hat. Like he would still be looking at it until it was corrected. And then that word would disappear and then the next word would appear. That was a process by which this translation was supposedly made.
There's 269,320 words in the Book of Mormon. I would assume that would take an extremely long time if that was actually correct.
Also, it's a big problem now. It wasn't as much of a problem when the Book of Mormon was first published, but now there have been changes to the Book of Mormon. And while it's true that the majority of those changes are grammatical or spelling related and don't really change the meaning, there are some places where the meaning does change. And that in and of itself is a problem. But also when you throw in all the stuff about Joseph supposedly translating by the gift and power of God and not of man, any sort of changes are problematic. Like, why didn't they get it right the first time if God was the one who was telling them what the word was supposed to be?
Right.
Yeah. But in any case, progress was really slow under Martin Harris, I think largely due to the fact that Joseph Smith was trying to form his sentences as perfectly as he could the first time around. Actually, they were engaged in translating from the 12th of April to the 14th of June in 1828. So that's about 2 months, give or take. In that process, they only ever actually managed to translate less than 2 pages a day, which if you think about it, I mean, it's not going to take me like an entire day to read 2 pages. Right. If all he was doing was just reading these words and Martin Harris is writing them down, it shouldn't have taken that long. And at the end of that 2-month period, they had a total of 116 pages. That included the stuff that Emma wrote. So just to give you a sense of how much progress they really weren't making. So once they had that 116 pages, they kind of came to an impasse because Emma was pregnant and was about to give birth soon, and they were going to have to stop anyway. And at this point, they were living in Harmony while Martin Harris's wife was in New York. And that's Harmony, Pennsylvania. Lucy Harris, Martin Harris's wife, God bless her, she was losing her patience with her husband. Because she didn't like the fact that he was subsidizing this whole process. She was completely not on board at any point. And so Martin Harris thought, I could just take these 116 pages that we produced and just give it to her and show her this work. Now, I don't know if his motivation was to show her that they were producing something, they were getting something done. But if you spend any time amongst Mormons, one thing that kind of stands out, at least to me, is that their primary apologetic is experience.
Right.
When the missionaries come to your home, they'll invite you to read the Book of Mormon. They'll invite you to come to church with them or things like that. And the assumption is if you would just read the Book of Mormon, you would be illuminated. You would see how great it is. Or if you would just come to church and just see how welcoming and inviting this whole environment is, that would transform you. And if you're not moved by that, then maybe you're just not spiritually ready for that. And not only that, but there's also a lot of subjective kind of inward spiritual experience kind of stuff that they regard as being really, really powerful. So I think that Martin Harris's attempt to show these pages to his wife could very well be motivated by that kind of a thing. Like if
Right.
you could just read this, you would understand that what we're doing is really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Things don't quite go the way that Martin wanted them to go. he goes and he hands this manuscript of 116 pages to his wife. And she says, well, I'm going to read this. If you just leave the room for a second. At some point after he does that, that manuscript is gone. It straight up disappears from history. And so Martin Harris, he's like looking everywhere. He's looking under the couch cushions. He's checking the rafters, all this kind of stuff.
2 months of work.
Yeah, it was 2 months of work. And also, I think he really did believe that this was somehow from God. And he's like, I'm in so much trouble.
Yeah. So how did he get the pages from Joseph?
Well, initially he just went up and asked for him, and Joseph said no. But after kind of prodding him for a while, Smith is just like, okay, fine. You can take this. While Martin Harris is gone, some stuff happens to Emma Smith. She gives birth, but the child does not survive.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And she actually gets really sick from this for about a month, like 3 or 4 weeks. And it's kind of touch and go for a little while. So it's rough in the Smith house already. And then Harris shows up and he's like, I don't have a manuscript. It's gone. And they both, him and Joseph, just start freaking out. And they're just saying like, it's over. It's all over. All this kind of stuff.
Wait. What about Martin Harris's wife? Like
she's just like, I don't know where it went. That was basically her
she wasn't like, if it's from God, he can just reproduce it.
I think that was kind of the assumption. She's like, if this is really from God, there shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
But it was a problem.
Yeah.
Honestly, like that was kind of the situation they were in, especially because Joseph Smith did not know what Lucy did with this. He didn't know whether she destroyed it or if she, pawned it off to somebody, or if she was just sitting on it waiting for them to retranslate some part of it. And then she would just whip it out and say, see, it doesn't match with this. That's an issue. And so for what ended up happening is that for a period of a couple of weeks, they just stopped the work. They didn't move forward at all. Cause like, where do you go?
Yeah. Emma's like slowly recovering from near-death experience.
Yeah.
Joseph's first child died.
Yeah.
Lost 2 months of work.
Yeah. And now he had probably spent a lot of time working on planning and trying to figure out like what his life is going to look like or where he's going to go with this. And now it's over.
Mm-hmm.
It's like losing your career in a sense. What do you do now? So for a couple of weeks, they just didn't do anything. And then after that period, Joseph receives 2 revelations, and these are recorded for us. I'm not going to read both of them, but they're recorded for us in Doctrine and Covenants, section 3 and section 10. In section 3, God supposedly says, you're going to start doing the work again. Don't do that again. Basically, that was it. Like, you're okay, but if you do anything else like this, then you're going to be destroyed and your gift is going to be taken away and it's over. In section 10, he describes that Satan provoked evil men to change the manuscript, thereby trapping Joseph, so that if he was to reproduce any part of the 116 pages, again, they could just say, see, it doesn't match up because they changed it, not because he wasn't really translating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's their fail-safe.
Yeah, exactly. And then that, of course, was the final solution to this. They said, okay, you're going to move forward, but instead of retranslating the 116 pages, you're going to move on to a different book, the Book of Nephi. And you're going to start from there, forget about the Lehi stuff. There are many problems with this whole situation. For one thing, how would they change the manuscript? You would have to create a new one, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't just copy and paste. That's not how that works. So you would have to create an entirely new manuscript, and people would just easily recognize, okay, this is a completely different handwriting. This doesn't look at all the same. Also, if it was possible for them to change the manuscript to conflict with any new retranslation, well, the 116 pages was supposed to be the story of Lehi, and then the Book of Mormon as we have it now starts with his son Nephi. There's overlap here. There's some of the things that supposedly were talked about more in the Book of Lehi than in this, but were still mentioned here. So couldn't they just make it so that it still doesn't disagree? That's a problem, or that it still disagrees. Like that's a big issue. But one of the biggest issues that we have now is that after almost 200 years, if we haven't seen it at this point reappear, it's gone. She destroyed it. And there's very little evidence to suggest otherwise. So why does God not know that this manuscript is just gone and you can start over?
Right. He still has the plates.
Yeah. Like, why not?
Yeah. Especially if it's a missing scripture.
Yeah.
What about, so say he talks about this language, Reformed Egyptian. Was there anything that was done to try to bring credibility to what Joseph Smith was claiming?
Yes. That was, I think you might be referring to the Anthon manuscript.
Yes.
Okay. Who gave you that idea? So what Harris was trying to do was he was trying to get people excited about the Book of Mormon and thereby drive up book sales. So his idea was he could take the plates to scholars, various scholars of ancient religion and ancient languages and stuff like that. And they could authenticate at the very least that this was real language or that these plates were real ancient stuff. Joseph doesn't allow him to do this, but he does make this little concession where he writes down on a piece of paper a bunch of different random letters from supposedly from the plates. And we actually have pictures, at least, of what this manuscript looked like. So Martin Harris initially shows this to a guy named Samuel L. Mitchell, who was the vice president of Rutgers Medical College. Now, this guy was super smart. He had a reputation of being basically a walking encyclopedia. Just a super, super smart guy. Unfortunately for Harris, Mitchell believed something at this time that wasn't super popular. He believed that Native Americans actually came from Eastern Asia and came over to North America by a land bridge. That you might recognize as being the common theory today.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But at the time, Mitchell was sort of in the minority there. There was some evidence to suggest that he was right, but it was sort of slow in coming down to the average people. So he was just sort of unlucky to find the one guy who knew at that time that there's no way that this Book of Mormon story could be true. But Mitchell did kind of pass on a name named Charles Anthon, or Anthon, however you want to pronounce that. And Harris goes to him. Now, what happens during that meeting is a little bit, it's a little bit uncertain, depending on what sources you want to regard as being authoritative or reliable. Harris claims that Anthon actually declared the characters to be legitimate. He says that Anthon wrote a note which said that they were real Reformed Egyptian or real language. But after Anthon heard the story behind the manuscript, he actually set the note on fire, and it never saw the light of day. Afterward, Harris described the plates and the whole situation behind the Book of Mormon, and Anthon asked to see them. Harris said he wasn't allowed to show him. And Anthon's response was, well, I cannot read a sealed book. Now, if you're familiar at all with the book of Isaiah, that phraseology might sound sort of familiar. Mormons to this day see this interaction as being a fulfillment of Isaiah chapter 29, where it talks about somebody bringing a sealed book to somebody who is learned, and he says, I can't read this because it's sealed. So they view Isaiah 29 as being fulfilled ultimately in the Book of Mormon. And there's another passage in there that sounds similar to the Book of Mormon until you start looking a little bit more closely at it. So that's Harris's view of what happened. Of course, Charles Anthon denies this. He says that is absolutely not what happened. So he wrote a letter to a guy named E.D. Howe. He was not a very nice person to the Mormon people, but he did end up providing a lot of useful information. He was actually an editor of a newspaper in the Kirtland area once we get to that period. He was upset by the fact that that both his wife and his daughter became Mormons, and he was absolutely not having it. And so he commissioned somebody to go out and get some information, basically find some dirt on Mormonism. And he did. He found a completely different type of dirt than what he was looking for, but he got it. And so when Charles Anthon found out that people were using this story of his interaction with Martin Harris to legitimize something that he knew was absolutely not legitimate, he wrote a letter to E.D. Howe, basically saying, this didn't happen. It's nonsense. It's not at all like that. If you want to just go ahead and read all that, it's like...
Yeah, sure. I'll read it. So this is Anthon's reply. This is New York, February 17th of 1834. Dear sir, I received this morning your favor of the 9th instant and lose no time in making reply. The whole story about my having pronounced the Mormonite inscription to be quote unquote reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics is perfectly false. Some years ago, a plain and apparently simple-hearted farmer called upon me with a note from Dr. Mitchell of our city, now deceased, requesting me to decipher, if possible, a paper which the farmer would hand me, in which Dr. M confessed that he had been unable to understand. Upon examining the paper in question, I soon came to the conclusion that it was all a trick, perhaps a hoax. When I asked the person who brought it how he obtained the writing, he gave me, as far as I can now recollect, the following account. A gold book consisting of a number of plates of gold fastened together in the shape of a book by wires of the same metal had been dug up in the northern part of the state of New York, and along with the book, an enormous pair of gold spectacles.
With an exclamation point.
Yeah, that's why I tried to exclaim it there. These spectacles were so large that if a person attempted to look through them, his two eyes would have been turned towards one of the glasses merely, the spectacles in question being altogether too large for the breadth of the human face. Whoever examined the plates through the spectacles was enabled not only to read them, but to fully understand their meaning. All this knowledge, however, was confined at the time to a young man who had the trunk containing the book and spectacles in his sole possession. This young man was placed behind a curtain in the garret of a farmhouse, and, being thus concealed from view, put on the spectacles occasionally, or rather looked through one of the glasses, deciphered the characters in the book, and having committed some of them to paper, handed the copies from behind the curtain to those who stood on the outside. Not a word, however, was said about the plates having been deciphered by the gift of God. Everything in this way was effected by the large pair of spectacles. The farmer added that he had been requested to contribute a sum of money toward the publication of the Golden Book, the contents of which would, as he had been assured, produce an entire change in the world and save it from ruin. Yeah, we'll end it from there.
Yeah. So that's kind of Charles Anthon's response to these claims that were going around, and his name was constantly being associated with Mormonism. People were undoubtedly writing him letters asking like, hey, is this real? Like, somebody's telling me that you said that this is legit. And he's like, that's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe I still have to deal with this.
Is this the same guy who said Jesus Christ was a deer? That's how he replies.
Yeah, probably. This is the deer Christ guy, right? But yeah, and something similar to that actually happens nowadays. There are people who go around saying that the Smithsonian Institute uses the Book of Mormon to determine where their dig sites and stuff should be. And people will write into the Smithsonian or email them or whatever and say like, hey, do you really do that? And so they have a statement somewhere. I think it's on their website, where they respond to it's just a standard response that they use anytime anyone emails them about this, where they say, no, absolutely not. We do not use the Book of Mormon to find all this kind of stuff. For the record, though, there is a book that they do use in that way. It's called the Bible. They use the Bible to determine where certain locations should be, or how far away from this or that or the other thing. They do this kind of stuff all the time, but they don't do it at all for the Book of Mormon.
Wow. Yeah, here's the statement. regarding the Book of Mormon from the Natural History Smithsonian Institute, Washington, D.C. I think the statement is 20560. It says this: the Smithsonian Institution has never used the Book of Mormon in any way as a scientific guide. Smithsonian archaeologists see no direct connection between the archaeology of the New World and the subject matter of the book. 2, the physical type of American Indian is basically Mongoloid, being most closely related to that of the peoples of Eastern, Central, and Northeastern Asia. Archaeological evidence indicates that the ancestors of the present Indians came into the New World, probably over a land bridge known to have existed in the Bering Strait region during the last ice age. See, there's weird things that I'd probably even disagree with on the Smithsonian Institute, because they have a worldview through which they also interpret information. Right. However, the point being is that they have said, no, we do not use the Book of Mormon. Actually, the Book of Mormon is giving you information that is in direct conflict with archaeological findings. And
similar
evidence.
to how Charles Anthon felt about his name being associated with Mormonism. Like, it should be the end of the discussion, really. But even now, you'll hear people make that same claim that Charles Anthon legitimized the Book of Mormon. What really happened was he looked at this. He looked at this manuscript. He looked at this piece of paper, and he noticed that a lot of the characters looked like just sideways versions of known characters that you'd find in like Greek or Hebrew or something like that. And he mentioned this. And I think Harris took that to mean that Anthon was saying this is an actual language.
He was hearing what he wanted to hear.
Yeah. All that Anthon was saying is it looks like somebody just took a bunch of different letters from different languages and just added, a little bit or turn around or upside down or something like that. And that's all it was. And then it's still something that you hear today. And that blows my mind.
You know what's interesting to me? It sounds like Harris as well kind of believed that there were golden plates.
Oh, I think he did. I think that adds to...
Because he asked Joseph, he's like, can I bring them? Can I bring them?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I don't think he ever saw them.
Well, the story is that the people who were supposedly shown the plates were never actually shown the plates. What happened was that they had been fasting for a really long time in order to see the plates because they had to be like purified. They had to be ready for it. And what they actually saw was not something that they saw with their physical eyes, but with their spiritual...
They had a vision.
Yeah. And Martin Harris did say something to that effect at one point. Like somebody cornered him on it. He's like, did you see the plates with your physical 2 eyes? And he's like, no, I saw them with the eyes of faith. And I think that's the best explanation that anyone can really come up with for how it is that they could have supposedly seen these plates when everything else points us in the direction that these plates never existed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have the Anthon manuscript. We have Anthon directly claiming that these things are a hoax, essentially a counterfeit. Then we also have the losing of the 116 pages, which were the first pages transcribed by Emma and Martin Harris.
Yes.
So where do we go after that when they start the work of the Book of Mormon again?
Well, things didn't really go all that well under Harris. I mean, they were making some progress, but obviously there were some problems, and things had kind of slowed down. So now we insert a guy named Oliver Cowdery.
Okay.
Oliver Cowdery was born in 1806. So he was a little bit younger than Joseph by just a few months. He also was born in Vermont. He was raised a Congregationalist. So he was in a relatively Orthodox Protestant denomination. Mm-hmm. Of course, anything is Orthodox relative to Mormonism, let's be honest.
Right.
But he was known to be a schoolmaster while he was in Manchester, and he became one of the principal scribes in translating the Book of Mormon. While Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery were working together, they just blew past this, and they, I think, were working together at some point in 1829, and they just breezed through it, way, way, way quicker. I think at that point, Smith had a better concept of what he wanted to write and how he wanted to say it, and he probably have memorized portions of it in his head, so he can go a lot faster. So after a few months of doing this, it was like 2 or 3 months that they were working together, the Book of Mormon was finally finished. But here comes the problem with printing. So initially they had made a deal with a printer who would print 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon with a guarantee from Martin Harris that he would cover at least $3,000. So the way that this worked was that, if they printed the 5,000 copies and didn't make a dime off of them, Martin Harris would be on the hook for $3,000. Or if they only sold maybe $1,500 worth, Harris would be on the hook for the other $1,500. So he was printing these copies of the Book of Mormon ahead of being paid for them. The problem is, as you said before, he did tell people that the Book of Mormon was coming. And a lot of people in the community were not happy with this, understandably. They didn't want somebody claiming that they had, they didn't want the printer printing something that was supposed to be new revelations from God when they really weren't. So this kind of a concerned citizens brigade situation happened where they send a letter to the printer saying, we are boycotting this book, or we are not buying this, and also we're going to try and persuade everyone we know not to buy this. And they signed their names. And we don't know how many names there were, but it was enough that the printer was kind of freaked out. And he decided to pause the production of the Book of Mormon in order to demand payment up front.
Okay.
And a part of their agreement was that Martin Harris would go so far as to mortgage his farm if he had to do it in order to pay this $3,000.
Whoa.
But he wasn't planning on this being an issue, of course. So that led Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, Joseph Smith, a handful of other people to kind of, it put them in this situation where they were like, we got to come up with $3,000 in order to get this thing moving. How are we going to do that? So initially it was thought, okay, well, maybe we could just have Martin Harris just mortgage his farm. That was a process, right? It's going to take a little while to make that happen. And also, you really just don't want to do that if you don't have to. So the idea came up that maybe they could sell the copyright to the Book of Mormon. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Joseph claimed to receive a revelation from God, telling him to send Oliver Cowdery and Hiram Page to go to Toronto. And it was said that a man would be found there who was anxious to buy the copyright. Guess what happened? They went to Toronto, and according to Cowdery himself, he says this: "We did not find him and had to return surprised and disappointed. I well remember how hard I strove to drive away the foreboding which seized me, that the first elder had made tools of us, where we thought in the simplicity of our hearts that we were divinely commanded." One of the other people involved in this, a man named David Whitmer, who again was one of the witnesses, he says this: "Well, we were all in great trouble, and we asked Joseph how it was that he had received a revelation from the Lord for some brethren to go to Toronto and sell the copyright, and the brethren had utterly failed in their undertaking. Joseph did not know how it was, so he inquired of the Lord about it. And behold, the following revelation came through the stone. Some revelations are of God, some revelations are of men, and some revelations are of the devil." So we see, and this is David Whitmer speaking again, so we see that that the revelation to go to Toronto and sell the copyright was not of God, but was of the devil or of the heart of man. When a man inquires of the Lord concerning a matter, if he is deceived by his own carnal desires and is in error, he will receive an answer according to his erring heart, but it will not be a revelation from the Lord. This was a lesson for our benefit, and we should have profited by it in future more than we did. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. It reminds me so much of what goes on, or what was going on in the school of the prophets during that time, with Prophet Onias trying to train up one of the Lafferty brothers to be the one mighty and strong, which we'll get into those concepts later. But in terms of revelation, it's how do you know that it's actually true according to the standards that the Mormons have? So what we see here with Joseph Smith is he clearly gives a false prophecy, but then he just replies with this: well, some are from God, some are from man, and some are from the devil. So the question would be for the school of prophets or Prophet Onias and things of that nature. It's like, how do you know if there's a revelation to go commit blood atonement to murder somebody was of you or of the devil or of God?
Yeah, how do you know? And I think that's, to be fair, that's not just a question that Mormons have to answer.
Right.
There are a lot of people today who believe that God is still giving like prophetic words and things like that. And the question does come up to them as well. Like, how do I differentiate between God speaking to me in my spirit versus just some opinion that I have or some inclination that I have? And people will kind of stumble over themselves to try and give some kind of an answer to that question. And I'm saying this as somebody who, and that's just my own view, is a continuationist. I don't think that necessarily the gift of prophecy has stopped, but this is an issue, and it's something that we have to really spend some time considering. But the great thing about it is we do actually have a firm foundation in the Bible itself. We don't have to, we're not left to our own feelings or anything like that to be the foundation for our faith. We have in the Bible a clear account of who God is and who humanity is and what the gospel is. And we're not stuck in the kind of situation that Mormons are. How do you base your faith off of something that is in many cases just so indefensible?
Yeah. In Joseph Smith's own retort here about his false prophecy, he clearly shows the fallibility of the Book of Mormon.
Some revelations are of the devil.
Either the Book of Mormon is of the heart of man, of the devil, or of God. And it's definitely not of God because it contradicts with God's previous revelation. So it falls into the one of the other of the two.
Right.
By Joseph Smith's own admission right there.
And Joseph Smith, as well as a number of other Christian cult leaders, he has this kind of quiver of ways that he can go about addressing these kinds of problems. This is one of them where he just sort of says where, some revelations just aren't from God. Sometimes you just feel like God is telling you something and he's not. He's also going to go to other ways of doing this. Well, he'll say the reason that this didn't happen was because you lacked the faith. That, and it's not just Joseph Smith, but a lot of other prophets after him will do the same kind of thing, especially with the Missouri prophecy that the Lord would build up Zion within a certain amount of time.
In 57 years.
Yeah. And then one of the turn of the century prophets is like, this did not happen. It was not fulfilled. And the reason for why it wasn't fulfilled is because people didn't have enough faith.
Yeah.
You see this in the charismatic movement all the time. It didn't happen because you didn't have enough faith. And it's a wretched weight to put on people.
Yeah. You're never going to be perfect. You're never going to be holy enough.
Yeah. God's whole plan for you depends on whether you have enough faith. And I can tell you right now, there's not a single person in the world who has enough faith to activate God's will for your lives. Like, we do not have that kind of control.
Wow. Yeah. That's the believing the opposite almost dilutes the gospel in so many ways.
It really does.
Because it's Jesus. It's all about Jesus, right?
Yeah. And that's something you find with this, that they talk about God all the time. They really do. But what is the role of Christ in their theology or in the life of the Mormon? And there's so much in Mormon theology that is explicitly man-centered. Man is that he may have joy is a line from the Book of Mormon. We know that man exists in order to glorify God and enjoy him forever.
Right.
It's about God. Our existence is about God, but in Mormonism, our existence is about ourselves.
Yeah, I use that line actually in evangelism. I say that they'll be like, well, then what's the purpose of man? They'll literally ask me, I'll be like, well, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, not to become a God and be glorified forever or be worshipped forever.
I actually had a really good conversation a month or two ago with, it was me and Mo and a guy named Jonathan, I want to say. And we got around to that topic and we were talking about, like, what does it mean to enjoy God? I'm like, this is not normally a conversation that we end up having in our evangelistic conversations. Normally they don't bring that up, but it was a really nice change of pace and it was a really pleasant conversation. I really hope that guy comes back. but yeah, like in Mormonism, the whole system really is man-centered. Not even in the sense that like they push Christ out altogether, but you have somebody who's trying to sit on the throne at the same time as the king is, and it's just uncomfortable and awkward for everyone involved. That's not my throne. I shouldn't be there. Whether I'm allowing God to sit there or not.
Yeesh. Yeah, that's heavy stuff, dude. And you know what? That video is kind of like the first 116 pages because I tried to look for it to edit it, and I had the whole conversation on video he's referring to, and I can't find it anywhere. So shame on me for that. I don't know where it went. I'm still looking for it.
How dare you?
Yeah, I know. But continuing on, eventually the Book of Mormon does get published. But what's the story essentially in the Book of Mormon? How many pieces is it broken up to? Kind of like, what's the outline?
So the basic outline is this. It starts with a prophet named Lehi at about the time that the Jews were taken into captivity in Babylon. So it's a little bit before, a little bit after 600 BC, that he had been ministering in and around Jerusalem, and God told him to pack up his family and go to the New World, and which they did. And it was like a submarine that they took. It's like an old school submarine. It was weird, but they come to America, and then the two of the sons, Nephi and Laman, are at odds with one another, and it becomes sort of like an Isaac and Ishmael thing. Like their descendants are constantly at odds with one another, and it's to the point where the Nephites, the descendants of Nephi, are considered the good guys for the most part, whereas the Lamanites are like the bad guys. You might recall in our first episode, we talked a little bit about the racist ideologies that were going around at the time about the Native Americans, that there was no way modern day Native Americans could have produced the kind of artwork that we were seeing in burial mounds and things like that. And so it must have been that there was some other society of Native Americans that was far more advanced and like better. And then these ones just wiped them out. And that's basically the outline of the Book of Mormon. But the key thing that, as any Mormon will tell you, is that Jesus does come to America. And he begins preaching among the natives there for a time at least, and then he leaves. And then we're back to people fighting from one side to the other, and there's a lot of warfare, especially in the second half. There's also a story about a group that came over from the Tower of Babel. Again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, and they just kind of show up. There's a point at the Book of Mormon where it just cuts away from the story that it's been telling and goes to this group of people, and then they show up, and then they just disappear. And then we're back to the Nephites and the Lamanites. And then that ends with this climactic battle on the hill Cumorah. At this point, Moroni, I believe, I get the names mixed up a little bit. He takes the record of the Book of Mormon, basically, and buries it in the ground and kind of prays over it. There's this kind of famous painting of him in this like wool suit praying to God, and that's kind of the gist of it. Honestly, I think many Christians are shocked when they read the Book of Mormon to find that there is so little in it. Yeah, that's the one.
I'll put the picture on there too.
Yeah. And this is something every Mormon has seen. It's a very famous, iconic painting.
Oh yeah, I've seen it
all the time. And but it's shocking how little of Mormon theology is actually present in the Book of Mormon. In fact, off the top of my head, I can only really think of maybe 3 things, other than the fact that I don't think this story actually happened. Maybe 3 things that I would say as a Christian, I cannot agree with this. One would be there's kind of dualism that's described, like you can't have sin without righteousness. And then there's a line where he says, we are saved by grace after all we can do, which I think clearly meant at the time that we are saved by grace and also by our works.
Well, there's Moroni 10:32 as well, which is love the Lord with all your might, mind, and strength, and then God's grace is sufficient for you.
Yeah, that kind of goes along with it. And I think a lot of modern Mormons are sort of trying to explain that away, but like you have to, if you're beholden to the prophets.
Well, it's in line with their Article 3 in their Article of Faith, which is all mankind may be saved through the atonement of Jesus Christ by obedience to the gospel ordinances and principles. So if they deny 2nd Nephi and they deny Moroni, well, how are you going to deny that?
Yeah, and they're not using obedience in the same sense that the author of Hebrews uses it, where he uses obedience and belief as sort of synonyms for one another. Like they're just talking about regular old school obedience, like just do the thing.
The law.
Yeah, exactly.
Their law.
Right. And so I think Mormons today try to get around that kind of stuff by saying, we become saved by grace once we've reached the end of our rope, and we've gotten to a point where we've tried everything else and we recognize that God's way is the best way, that kind of stuff. That's absolutely not what Joseph Smith originally taught. That's not what the prophets originally taught about that passage, but whatever. And then the other thing, obviously, is that First Nephi does teach that the Bible was corrupted.
Yeah.
Missing many
plain and precious parts.
But if you remove Joseph Smith as a prophet and the claim that the Book of Mormon is scripture, I could throw away kind of those things and still like try and find some kind of gems in there or something. But
I got a question.
What's up?
What year was it supposedly then that this great battle took place with Moroni?
Let me see here.
Was it sometime before or after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD?
Oh, it was after. It was in the 400s somewhere.
Okay, this is what cracks.
Yeah.
Oh, never mind. I was thinking of something totally different. Never mind. We're good. Okay, so.
Yeah, you think of different things.
Yeah.
It's 421.
421. Okay, so then most of. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Never mind. So anyways, the Book of Mormon then was published when?
The Book of Mormon was published, let me see here. I can never remember the date. It was published on March 26, 1830, and then a couple weeks later, on April 6, 1830, the church was officially incorporated and organized.
Wow, literally like not even a month later, just a few days later.
Yeah, that's why I'm thinking, that gap of 1823 to 1827, and then some of the stuff that happened between there and 1830 was probably just Joseph Smith trying to figure out what he was going to do. And this is where, like I said before, it's more what Smith does than what he teaches that makes Mormonism unique. A lot of the other groups that showed up, they didn't provide much in the way of organization. They didn't provide a church, like an official church. There were exceptions. I think the Campbellites were like that, but most of the prophets that came up, they didn't, establish a quorum of apostles or anything like that. They didn't establish a first presidency, an organization, a plan of some kind. And so they just disappeared. They just they came up like weeds, and then they were done away with. Smith had the foresight to actually organize a church and even baptizing people into it and giving people specific responsibilities. So yeah, these two things go very, very hand in hand together.
Wow, this is huge, man. All right, so we've been going for a while now. I think this is a great place to end our third episode. I think we'll begin the next one with Joseph Smith's like supposed first miracle, the life and ministry, quote unquote ministry of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, as well as a couple of stories in the Book of Mormon that I think will become particularly relevant as time goes on.
Oh, okay. Specifically for the Under Banner of Heaven and stuff?
Well, kind of throughout, but yeah.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So thank you guys for sticking with us here. This has been extremely awesome. I feel extremely blessed to do this. Ryan, thank you so much for all of your hard work in this. It's awesome. It shows so much. And thank you guys for listening to this. Thank you for supporting us here at our Cultish Revamp, Cultish 2.0 website. We pray that you like this and that you continue watching. But you guys have a wonderful day, and God bless.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you enjoyed this episode. This podcast is a 100% crowd-funded ministry. So please, if you want to allow this content to continue, go to thecultishshow.com. We ask that you prayerfully consider becoming a donor with us and being a monthly supporter. And we thank you so much for your consideration. Enjoy the next episode.